From the outside, our family looked perfect. We lived in a quiet suburban neighborhood with trimmed hedges and freshly painted fences. My father loved to tell people we were blessed beyond measure. My mother smiled brightly at church gatherings. And my older sister, Vanessa, was the shining jewel of it all. Vanessa was everything they ever wanted: confident, graceful, effortlessly beautiful. Teachers adored her, neighbors praised her, my parents worshipped her, and then there was me, Lena, the other daughter. Growing up, I learned quickly that love in our house was conditional. Vanessa received piano lessons, new dresses, and applause for every small achievement. I received hand-me-downs and expectations. When she forgot to wash a dish, it was brushed off with a laugh. When I left a glass in the sink, it became a lecture about responsibility. She's just more delicate. My mother would say whenever I questioned the difference, delicate. That word followed Vanessa like a crown. And I was the one expected to carry the weight. By the time I was 15, I was doing most of the housework. Cooking dinners, cleaning bathrooms, folding laundry. My father would pat my shoulder and say, "At least you're useful." He meant it as praise. I swallowed it like medicine. Vanessa talked about fashion design schools and traveling the world. My parents eagerly funded her dreams. When I mentioned wanting to study business, my father laughed. "Business? You think too big for someone like you. Someone like me." Those words carved something sharp into my chest. After high school, Vanessa left for an expensive university. There were tears, a celebration dinner, dozens of photos. A week later, I packed my own bags quietly. No celebration, no speeches, just a small envelope from my mother with $50 inside. "Don't embarrass us," she said softly before closing the door. I moved into a tiny studio apartment and took the first job I could find cleaning houses. The work was exhausting. My hands cracked from chemicals and my back ached every night, but there was something peaceful about it too. Order, transformation, walking into chaos and leaving it spotless. I worked in large homes with marble floors and glass staircases. Homes where people spoke about investments over breakfast and signed contracts at kitchen islands bigger than my entire apartment. They rarely noticed me, but I noticed them. I noticed how they organized their schedules, how they managed staff, how they built systems. I listened when they discussed property management, rental portfolios, and client relations. I asked careful questions when appropriate. Some homeowners were surprisingly kind. "You're very observant," one woman once told me as I finished polishing her dining table. I smiled. Observant was safer than ambitious. Meanwhile, whenever I visited home for holidays, my parents would introduce me the same way. "This is Lena. She cleans houses." They always added a small shrug as if apologizing for me. Relatives would nod sympathetically. Some would say, "Well, honest work is still work." Others would change the subject quickly. Vanessa, glowing with confidence, rarely defended me. She wasn't cruel, just indifferent. I had long ago stopped expecting more. What my parents never asked was whether cleaning houses was my limit, or just my beginning. By 25, I had learned far more than how to scrub countertops. I understood pricing structures. Contracts, client retention. I had savings tucked away, plans written carefully in notebooks, and contacts stored in my phone. But none of that mattered to my parents. To them, I was still the daughter who cleaned. And when Vanessa announced her extravagant wedding complete with a luxury venue and hundreds of high-profile guests, my mother called me personally. "Wear something simple," she advised, "and please don't tell people too much about your job." I stared at the phone long after she hung up. For years, I had carried their shame like it belonged to me, but something inside me had changed. I would attend the wedding. Not to prove anything, just to see what would happen when the truth no longer needed permission to exist. The wedding venue looked like something out of a fairy tale. Crystal chandeliers shimmered above polished marble floors. White roses cascaded from golden arches. A string quartet played softly near the entrance as guests in designer gowns and tailored suits filtered inside, laughing and clinking champagne glasses. I paused outside the grand doors for a moment, smoothing down my navy blue dress. It wasn't extravagant, but it was elegant. Clean lines, simple heels, hair pulled neatly back. I had learned long ago that quiet confidence didn't need sparkle. As I stepped inside, I felt the familiar weight of being out of place. My mother spotted me first. Her smile flickered before settling into something polite and thin. She kissed my cheek and scanned me from head to toe, as if checking for damage. "You look nice," she said carefully. "Stay near the back during photos." I nodded. I always nodded. Soon enough, the introductions began. "This is our other daughter." My father told a group of distant relatives, placing a firm hand on my shoulder. "She just cleans houses." He laughed lightly, like it was a harmless joke. I felt the words land the way they always did, soft on the outside, sharp underneath. "Oh," one woman replied, eyebrows lifting slightly. "Well, honest work." Another guest offered me a tight smile before turning back to discuss stock investments with my father. It happened again and again. "She just cleans houses. She does housekeeping. It keeps her busy." Each repetition chipped away at something inside me, but I refused to let it show. I had spent too many years mastering stillness. My face remained calm, my hands steady. Vanessa swept past me in her breathtaking white gown, glowing under the lights. She looked radiant, exactly the princess she had always been treated as. When her eyes briefly met mine, she smiled, distracted. "Glad you made it," she said quickly before being pulled away by bridesmaids. The ceremony was flawless. Vows exchanged under soft candlelight, applause echoing through the hall, tears glistening in my mother's eyes. During the cocktail hour, I stood near the balcony overlooking the garden. A few guests approached me out of politeness. "So, how long have you been cleaning?" one man asked, sipping his drink. "Several years." I replied evenly. "That must be tiring." "It can be," I said, "but it's also taught me a lot." He nodded absent-mindedly, clearly uninterested in what that meant. I excused myself and moved back inside. Near the head table, I overheard my mother speaking to a group of elegantly dressed women. "Yes, Vanessa always aimed high," she said proudly. "We're so proud of her. Lena, oh, she's more practical. She cleans houses." The women murmured sympathetically. My chest tightened, but I forced myself to breathe slowly. I had promised myself I wouldn't react tonight. I wouldn't defend myself. I wouldn't argue, not here. The reception began with dinner and speeches scheduled after dessert. Guests filled their plates with gourmet dishes while waitstaff moved seamlessly between tables. Ironically, I understood the choreography of it all, the staffing ratios, the timing, the coordination. I noticed the small mistakes too, a delayed wine refill, a misplaced centerpiece adjustment. Years of observation had trained my eye. But to everyone else, I was invisible. As the night progressed, the phrase continued floating through the air. "She just cleans houses." By the time dessert was served, I almost found it amusing, almost. Finally, the MC tapped the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, it's time for the groom's speech." Applause erupted as Daniel rose from his seat. He looked confident, composed, and deeply in love with my sister. I folded my hands in my lap, preparing for the usual gratitude, filled words about family and support. Daniel thanked the guests. He praised Vanessa's beauty and kindness. He spoke about partnership and the future. Then he paused, his eyes scanned the room slowly, and before I finish, he said, voice steady but deliberate, "There's someone here I'd like to personally thank." A quiet murmur rippled through the hall. Daniel's gaze settled directly on me. My heart skipped. "Lena," he said clearly. Every head in the room turned. For the first time that evening, I wasn't invisible, and something told me the night was about to change. The room felt smaller the moment Daniel said my name. Hundreds of eyes turned toward me at once. Conversations died mid-sentence. Forks paused halfway to mouths. Even the soft clinking of glasses seemed to fade into silence. I felt heat rise to my face, but forced myself to sit still. Daniel smiled gently. Yes, Lena, Vanessa's sister. A few guests nodded, already placing me in the category they'd been told all evening. The cleaner, Daniel adjusted the microphone slightly. Tonight has been about love, family, and gratitude, he began. And I've thanked many people already, but there's someone whose contribution to my life, and my family's life, most of you may not fully understand. A ripple of curiosity moved through the tables. I've heard several introductions tonight, he continued, glancing briefly toward my parents. I've heard Lena described as someone who just cleans houses. The word just hung heavily in the air. My mother's smile froze. Daniel's tone remained calm, but there was an unmistakable firmness beneath it. I'd like to clarify something. The silence deepened. About 4 years ago, my parents hired a cleaning service to manage several of our properties, not just one home, multiple properties, vacation rentals, investment homes, estates that require serious management. Guests began shifting in their seats. At the time, the company was relatively small, but it stood out because of one thing. Its owner personally oversaw every contract, every inspection, every detail. He looked directly at me again. That owner is Lena. A collective murmur spread through the room. I saw confusion first, then disbelief. Daniel continued before anyone could interrupt the moment. She didn't just clean houses. She built a professional luxury cleaning and property management company from the ground up. Whispers grew louder now. One that now employs over 30 staff members, he added, one that manages high-end properties across the region, one that my family trusts with assets worth millions. My father's hand slowly slid off the back of his chair. Daniel wasn't finished. When we first met Lena, she was personally cleaning our main residence, but within a year, she had scaled her operations. She introduced systems, digital scheduling, maintenance tracking, and client retention strategies that rival larger firms. A man at the table near the front leaned forward. "Wait, that company," he whispered to the woman beside him. Daniel nodded toward that same table. "In fact, several of you here are her clients. You may not have realized you were discussing her tonight." And now the whispers turned into open conversations. "That's the company we use for our summer property. She handles our rentals. She's the owner." My mother's expression shifted from confusion to shock. My father looked as though someone had removed the floor beneath him. Daniel's voice softened slightly. "Lena didn't advertise her success. She didn't brag. She simply worked, and she built something remarkable." He paused. "I respect hard work. I respect humility. And I respect someone who can walk into a room where they're underestimated and still stand tall." My chest tightened. Not with humiliation this time, but with something else, validation. Applause began hesitantly from one table. Then another. Within seconds, the entire room erupted, not polite clapping, real applause. I remained seated, hands folded, heart pounding. For years, I had defended myself in silence. I had swallowed comments, accepted labels, endured introductions that reduced my life's work to a single dismissive phrase. "She just cleans houses." Daniel smiled again, lifting his glass. "So tonight, I want to thank Lena, not only for the impeccable work she's done for my family, but for showing what dedication truly looks like." He raised his glass slightly in my direction. To Lena, the room echoed him, to Lena, and for the first time in my life, when people looked at me, I didn't see pity. I saw respect. Across the room, my parents stared at me as if they were seeing a stranger, but I hadn't changed. They had simply never bothered to look closely enough. And now, under crystal chandeliers and surrounded by witnesses, the truth stood taller than any insult ever could. The applause didn't fade quickly. It rolled through the hall like a wave, warm and undeniable. I could feel it in my chest, in my fingertips, in the steady rhythm of my breathing. For years, I had imagined what it might feel like to be acknowledged by my family, but this was different. This wasn't forced recognition, it was earned. As the applause softened, guests began rising from their seats, turning toward me with expressions I had never seen directed my way before. Admiration, curiosity, respect. A well-dressed woman approached my table first. I recognized her instantly. She owned one of the largest waterfront properties my company managed. "I had no idea you were the owner," she said warmly. "Your team is exceptional." "Thank you," I replied calmly. "I'm very proud of them." Within minutes, more guests gathered around me. A man asked about expansion into neighboring cities. Another mentioned needing management for newly purchased rental properties. Someone else complimented our efficiency during holiday turnover season. They weren't speaking to me out of politeness. They were speaking to me as a professional. Across the room, I saw my parents standing stiffly near the head table. My mother's hands were clasped tightly together. My father looked unsettled, as though he were trying to piece together a story he had never bothered to read. Eventually, they walked toward me. The crowd parted slightly as they approached. "Lena," my mother began, her voice unusually careful. "Why didn't you tell us you were doing all of this?" I met her eyes evenly. "I tried," I said softly. "You just never asked." My father cleared his throat. "You could have corrected us." I tilted my head slightly. "Would you have listened?" He didn't answer. There was no anger in my voice, no accusation, just truth. And truth, I had learned, was far more powerful than confrontation. Vanessa approached next, her wedding gown shimmering under the lights. For once, she didn't look superior. She looked thoughtful. "Is it true?" she asked quietly. "All of it?" "Yes," she exhaled slowly. "Why didn't you ever say anything?" I offered her a small, gentle smile. "Because I was busy building it." For a long moment, she simply stared at me. Not as the younger sister who folded laundry, not as the quiet girl in the background, but as someone she had underestimated. Daniel stepped beside her, resting a reassuring hand on her back. There was no tension in his expression, only quiet approval. "I meant every word," he said to me privately. "You deserve to be seen." And in that moment, I realized something important. The sweetest revenge wasn't public embarrassment. It wasn't raising my voice or exposing years of favoritism. It was standing there, calm, successful, unshaken, while the narrative they had created collapsed on its own. The rest of the evening felt different. When guests passed me, they nodded respectfully. Some asked for business cards. Others thanked me for my professionalism. I handed out my contact information with steady hands. Not once did I mention the introductions from earlier. I didn't need to. By the time the final dance began, I felt lighter than I had in years. Not because my parents suddenly approved of me, but because I no longer needed them to. I slipped out quietly before the night ended. No dramatic exit. No final speech. Outside, the cool air wrapped around me as I walked toward my car. The venue glowed behind me, laughter spilling into the night. My phone buzzed, a message from an unknown number. "Would love to discuss property management services next week." I smiled to myself. For years, I had been introduced as the daughter who just cleans houses. Tonight, I wasn't introduced at all. I was recognized, and as I drove away, I understood something deeply freeing. Success doesn't shout. It waits, and when the moment is right, it speaks for itself.